Evening, everybody. My name is Jana, and I am involved with the GLOR group. I'm also an active INTO member, but all of us activists in GLOR are doing this in our own time, in our personal time. So you're very welcome to this evening's webinar. We're going to be discussing the new pay deal, which is called Building Momentum. It's for public sector workers, and obviously every sector within the public service are going to have a different opinion on it, depending on how it affects their own working terms and conditions. So we would just like to make it clear to anyone watching this evening, this is aimed at primary school teachers. Obviously, how the deal would affect primary school teachers is different to how it would affect secondary school teachers. So as always, we would encourage people to become active in your union within your own sector and inform yourself about how the pay deal will affect your own terms and conditions for your job. Okay, so if we just go to the agenda for this evening, we have 4 panelists with us here today. All of them are INTO members and have been active at a local branch level, but they're speaking here in a personal capacity today. So we have Peter, who is a graduate within the 2011 to 2014 cohort. We also have Fiona, who is a postgrad since 2011. Next, we have Joe, who is another graduate since 2011. And then finally, we have Simon, who is a principal of a national school, and he is also the editor of the Unsure.net podcast, which focuses on current affairs in education today. After that, we'll have a short introduction to GLOR and why we formed and what our aim is. Next, we'll be looking at GLOR's position on the pay deal Building Momentum. And we will be specifically looking at the new agreement from 4 different perspectives. So that would be the perspective of a B.Ed graduate who graduated between 2011 and 2014, a postgrad teacher who entered since 2011, a principal teacher who have been campaigning as a group for their benchmarking award since 2007. And then in general, how the pay deal could affect our working terms for all primary school teachers, regardless of which pay scale you're currently on. And then, yeah, the areas that we'll be looking at, the pros and cons, as we say, pay, principals benchmarking, workload and reform, and then there's a few miscellaneous issues at the end. So I will hand you over to Fiona now, who is going to give the introduction to GLOR, how we came about and what our position is on this pay deal.
Thanks, Jana. So GLOR Devinturi is a group of primary school union members we formed in 2017 who want to empower others to use existing union structures to effect change and protect our working terms and conditions, including health and safety in the workplace. We formed GLOR to encourage INTO members to become more involved in our union. We are not anti-INTO, far from it. We want INTO members to use their voice using union structures, to actively and meaningfully listen to members and how to advance priority issues, and to keep primary school teachers informed. GLOR's position on building momentum. After lots of respectful internal debate and due to the diversity of opinions among people involved in GLOR, no consensus has been reached on a position or a side. So we've decided to put together a pros and cons list from 4 perspectives: the 2011 to 2014 B.Eds, 2011 onwards postgrad teachers, principals, and all teachers in general. So we'll go to Peter now for the primary B.Eds.
Great, thanks very much, Fiona. So being a graduate from 2011 to 2014, I am very much bang in the middle of this. So I feel like I have skin in the game for this particular agreement. So I have 2 short slides here of pros and cons. Just looking at the first slide there in the pros, the agreement does provide 98.9% pay equality for 2011 to 2014 B.Ed grads going forward. So 98.9%. New entrants are to receive equal pay by skipping from 0.11 to 0.13 on the incremental scale. And if they're already on 0.12 or higher, they will move 1 point further than they would under normal incremental progression. And that's what's in the agreement. The cons I have on this slide are the mantra of trade union: equal pay for equal work. So there is a 1.1% difference for those B.Ed grads. So the question needs to be asked, will this cohort of teachers be further isolated as they work alongside other staff members on a different pay scale? And it does not resolve the back pay for lost earnings between 2011 and 2018. The next slide then, back pay is not on the table for this agreement, and it's more of a point of information than a pro there, that this agreement is more about restoring the pay cuts than any agreement on back pay. And given the current financial climate, it is hard to see any better improvement attained in regards to restoring pay cuts in this particular context. The cons there, that it may potentially make pay inequality permanent in section 4.3.1. And this is a quote that it resolves in full, underlined there in the presentation, the remaining salary scale issues pertaining to new entrant teachers. So that is seen as a final resolution to pay inequality. And the question is to be asked, will this bridge ever be gapped? And I'll hand over to Fiona about postgrad LBTs.
Thank you. So I also have a few slides here on the pros and cons for the postgrad teachers. On the pro side, rightly or wrongly, postgrad allowances and postgrad starting points in the pay scale were never part of INTO definition of pay equality. INTO looked at BEd earnings for calculations, despite a sizable amount of teachers being postgrad trained. On the con side, it does not provide for postgrad additional missing point jumps in the scale. Figure is even less than 98.9% going forward, and there were no incentives to further education and thus no access to academic allowances. On the next slide, the pro is that there is an improvement on current figures under the PSSA, but for the cons, there is no contribution towards loss of earnings for 2011 to 2014 entrance into teaching. In section 4.3.1, in the final conclusion to the arrangements put in place, the following measures resolves in full the remaining salary scale issues pertaining to new entrant teachers. So on the last slide, on the pro side, the next deal will have another sectoral bargaining fund in reference section 2.3.4 of Building Momentum. So we could campaign to use this future fund to equalise postgraduate pay. However, on the con side, it closes the door on achieving full pay equality. Postgraduates will not get their missing point. BEd graduates will not get their 1.1%. And the 3 teacher unions have lodged a claim with the Teachers Conciliation Council to try and address this. It could be a long process. And now we'll move to Simon.
Hi there, Simon Lewis here, and I just want to say, first of all, thank you very much to Glór for giving me the opportunity to give a few thoughts about how this pay deal may affect principals and other school leaders. And I have to commend Glór on all the work they've been doing over the last number of years, but particularly in the last few weeks with raising awareness around what's been going on in schools. So without further ado, I'll go on and talk about how this deal potentially affects school leaders, and hopefully will be of use to you. I suppose really the big thing for school leaders, I guess since 2007, was the fact that they were awarded benchmarking, what was known as benchmarking, which was in recognition for the amount of work they were doing at the time in 2007. And finally, 12 years later, or even longer, actually 13 or 14 years later, we're finally going to receive that overdue benchmarking money in the form of an addition to our allowance. I suppose what it does as well is this deal secures both benchmarking and the skipping of point 12 for 2011 teachers, and it is a significant win. And I suppose it's worth noting as well that, I mean, when this pay inequality really started, these teachers were newly qualified, and a lot of them now are well into their teaching careers, and many are now principals themselves. So there's this Building Momentum pay deal, I suppose, in a way, affects people in lots of different ways. I'm going to go through the cons as I saw them, and there's a few more than there are pros. But the main con really, I suppose, for anyone who's been working since 2007 really is there is no back pay for this. Let's say, even though this wasn't really related to pay deals or anything else, it just wasn't paid, and it's not going to be paid by the looks of things. So there'll be a loss of between 25 and 30,000 euro for a maximum for unpaid benchmarking for those who are going to be affected. It was agreed, as I said, in 2007 in recognition for the extra work that principals and deputy principals were doing. And to be honest with you, I suppose the list of duties and responsibilities is substantially increased. I mean, the job I started in 2008 is a very, very different job to what I'm doing now. And really, I suppose principals now manage much higher numbers of staff. We've I mean, so many more special needs assistants working in schools, which we don't get any compensation for, bus escorts, caretakers, secretaries, all these various jobs that are out there. And then there's also these other initiatives that sort of come up in the last decade or so. I mean, two examples might be SSE and DRITID. And again, there's been no compensation whatsoever for these initiatives that were just landed on school leaders' doors, which of course filter through to the rest of the staff. The reform agenda, from what I can see, is going to add additional responsibilities to us as school leaders. And as I said, these are going to filter through to the rest of the staff. And the pay award really doesn't reflect anything in that. I mean, that was what was happening back in 2007. As well as that, though, I think, and this is probably for colleagues of ours who have since retired since 2011 and even before, this pay award won't be reflected in their pensions. And in a way, much like in 2011, when I think our colleagues here were sort of sold down to Swanee, this, in a way, is selling our colleagues who are now, I suppose, retired down the Swanee in possibly a similar way. So I think, that's worth considering. And the deal, of course, cements, I suppose, there's a discrepancy between pay, the allowance between a primary school principal and a post-primary school principal, and equality is not achieved in any way. For that, post-primary school leaders still get a much higher allowance than their primary colleagues. And really, I suppose, weaving its way through all of this, I think, and this is a personal opinion here, is trust. And in a way, the lack of it, in a way, given the outcome of probably the original pay deal back in 2011, which I remember very, very, very vividly, that really, I suppose, for want of a better word, we really threw our colleagues under the bus. And I mean that very, very much. Even if we didn't quite know what we were voting for at the time, I think we owe it to ourselves to really, really scrutinise this deal to make sure that we don't do something similar. And I suppose more recently, last time there was a pay deal. We rejected the deal in 2018. That was the last PSSA deal, which was ignored. So I think there's an element of trust that we have to consider with the recommendation that our union is giving to us, and really scrutinise it and try and find whatever holes there may be, if they exist. So they're just my thoughts anyway, and I hope the reviews, and I'll pass you on to Joe. Thanks so much.
Thanks very much, Simon. I suppose if you've been listening to this so far and you think, okay, that hasn't really affected me, this is the section for you, because in this deal it not only affects people who are waiting for pay equality, principals who are waiting for benchmarking, but it also affects every single one of us in the staff room, all of our colleagues. So I'm going to run through some of the pros and cons again in a similar fashion to previous speakers. So on the pro side, we have a 1% pay increase or €500, whichever is the highest. So it depends on where you are in the pay scale. This can fluctuate depending where you are, for all teachers on the 1st of October 2021. And then the same again, another 1% on the 1st of October 2022. So we're looking at a 2% pay increase over the next 2 years, within the next 2 years. As well as that, on the pro side, principals' allowances are increased as well. Now, unfortunately, there are quite a few cons to that for all of us. Academic allowances are not resolved, so obviously no pay equality for HDiPs, as we've already discussed, masters, PhDs, teaching through Irish Gaeltacht, teaching on an island. All of these allowances were there for a reason before they were cut in 2011, and they will not be restored under this deal and possibly never will be. Croke Park hours remain unchanged. The ASC deductions are now made permanent. We are not allowed to take any kind of industrial action on agreed issues that are covered by this agreement. There is a lot of unspecified productivity included within the deal. It repeatedly uses the word productivity, high-performing workforce, need to retrain, without actually telling us what that means on the ground for us day to day. The INTO definition of pay equality as career earnings, I think, is important here, because it is not money that's in our pockets yet. It's money that eventually, it is hoped, we will eventually get equality, but it's not something that we'll feel immediately from this deal. Further to that, we're already engaging with reform. Yes, so this is considered a pro, I suppose, because we are, as a workforce, continuously retraining. A lot of that not remunerated for. A lot of that is being done in our own time, sometimes on our own expense, through Croke Park hours, etc. But this is going to be solidified by this agreement. There are a lot of concerns from ordinary members regarding the working environment and implementation of the new curriculum and initiatives if people vote yes on this. So we're all experiencing the rollout of the new primary language curriculum. Multiply this by many different initiatives that will be coming down the line, and a lot of them are included in this agreement. The appendix to this agreement, with the agreement being 22 pages long, the appendix lists education sector reforms. Numerous documents are listed within that, and all of these documents require many man and woman hours of implementation, paperwork, rejigging or planning, whole school meetings. All of this is hours that we will not be remunerated for, and that we are signing up to with this agreement. There's a massive workload implied under a large number of these initiatives. It also includes the full inclusion of model of education, STEM demands, and I would say here, personally, the STEM demands include linking us in with the business community. This is something that maybe we need to reconsider, and something down the line that we could really be tied into something permanent there. CASAN obviously is included as well, which may worry some people as well. Further cons include initiatives as yet unidentified, which would be comprehended under annual action plans for education, which is in section 1.6.1. Teachers would have to comply with all, regardless of concerns. So basically, we're signing up to initiatives that we don't yet know about. Workload for principals massively affected with increased data collection demands, management of additional staff, and increased inspectorate focus. Section 1.3.2, and I quote, says, this agreement on positive work practice changes and measurable outcomes. So measurable outcomes means who's going to be doing the work? We'll be doing the work. And now I'm going to hand you over to Peter, who's going to run through the implications for all of us in terms of our pensions with this agreement.
Thanks very much, Joe. Yeah, just a word on pensions. So if you're to look at the pros in terms of this agreement, you could say that the restoration to the pay scales will positively impact on pensions due to its accumulative nature, albeit in a marginal sense. Also that pension inequalities are a separate battle. They were never going to form part of this deal. This deal was more geared towards the pay cuts. So if you take it in that context, then that might persuade you one way or the other. In terms of the cons, and I have heard this at my local AGM and rumblings elsewhere, that pension inequalities are not addressed, and they are a big issue for a cohort of teachers. People with the break in service on the new career average pension will have significantly less than those on the other pension model. So those most affected by unequal pay, so the 2012 grads, many moved to the 2013 pension. Few found jobs when they qualified, given the nature of the market at the time, and many more had to move abroad. And in that sense, they were doubly hit. So I do think pensions is a big issue that we should address, but in the context of this agreement is more geared towards the pay scales, whether that is something you agree with or not. So now I'm going to pass it on to Fiona, who's going to have a little discussion about other things that we need to consider, some what ifs.
Thanks, Peter. So just a couple of slides about different issues that you may want to consider further thoughts on. The first one is, if the membership chooses to reject the building momentum document, what will happen then? So the PSSA2 agreement was rejected by the INTO membership, but we remained encompassed by it. We did not engage in anything to repudiate the agreement, such as industrial action or non-cooperation with pro-park hours. There's no appetite for industrial action or strike, as shown by what happened when PSSA2 was rejected by the membership, so nothing changed. There's no mechanism for demanding anything better than what's currently on the table. Skipping point 12 might happen anyway, but no access to benchmarking, as we wouldn't have access to the sectoral bargaining fund, which is available to unions encompassed by building momentum agreement. On the next slide, one thing to consider is that FEMPI legislation no longer exists. So unlike in the PSSA and previous agreements, the government cannot threaten us with withdrawing anything that we signed up to under FEMPI. This means that if we were to take industrial action after securing benchmarking for principals, it would continue to be paid with no legislative basis for it to be withdrawn at that stage. And then there's the thought that accepting the first offer is giving in. We can always do better. We need to look at the whole picture and not just the obvious pay benefits. What are the hidden costs to workload in built? And why are there hidden costs? On the final slide, it seems that the government is hoping to sell this deal to INTO members based on BEd pay equality, so that people might be blindsided to other issues attached. Similar to 2011, when they blindsided serving teachers regarding their pay being protected, but 2011 onward teachers weren't protected. Regarding productivity, who knew that 10 years later we'd still be doing pro-park hours? Having said that, what's the alternative? And we're just going to move to Jana then for the conclusion.
Thanks, Fiona. So we hope that it has been clear from the webinar this evening that we really did attempt to be as neutral as possible in the information that we presented, and also as accurate as possible. There are some members within our activist group who felt one way or the other, but as we said at the opening, we weren't able to get consensus one way or the other. And then it was only when we started doing our research for this webinar that in certain cases the cons list ended up being longer than the pros list, which came as a surprise to some of us, myself included. So we hope that you found it beneficial, and this is just, I suppose, the down to brass tacks side of things. So the ballot will be open from Wednesday, the 3rd of February, which is this Wednesday, until Tuesday, the 9th of February inclusive. And if you are an INTO member, you will have received this information from INTO themselves. It'll be an online vote. You'll get your details this week on Wednesday, and the online balloting company that is handling it is called Civica Election Services. And also INTO head office are going to be doing a Facebook webinar tomorrow afternoon at 3:15. So we would, don't take just our word for it, or don't just take one source of information. Go and find as many reputable sources of information that you can, and then make up your own mind. So I suppose what we have seen this evening, and what to me personally wasn't obvious from the outset when I first saw this document, was that this is about far more than BEd pay equality. So there are many more issues at stake, particularly the workload, I think, is something of concern to all of us. And really at the end of the day, you need to make up your own choice about what way you're going to vote, but do be fully informed. And at the end of the day, the purpose of a trade union is to protect our working terms and conditions. As for how the postgrad new entrant teachers are treated, we do need to ask ourselves about an injury to one is an injury to all. Should we accept this agreement if it gives near pay equality to the BEd graduates from 2011 to 2014, if it doesn't provide the same for postgrads? I don't know the answer to that. That's something for everyone to make up their own minds on. But thank you to everyone who has been engaging with us so far. Again, we would just like to emphasize that this is coming from a primary school perspective, and we acknowledge and accept that the situation and the figures are different for secondary school. So please just be respectful of that in the comments. And we look forward to teasing this out further with you. Thanks, everyone. Take care.